Welcome back to the Velvet Underworld channels. And after this video, I would really like to know your thoughts about these stories. Feel free to share it under the comment sections and where you come from so that we could connect to each other better through this channel. Thank you.
Hillary was 22 years old. She had never walked alone to the mailbox. She had never chosen her own food. She had never touched the lock on her door, because it was on the wrong side. Her father told her it was love. The new neighbor recognized it for what it was, a prison. He had stepped away from the underworld to forget, but when he heard the scream that night, he remembered why he had started. Don't touch her again. 5 words, spoken calmly. And with those 5 words, a monster woke up to hunt another. The lock turned at exactly 6:47 p.m. Hillary knew the sound the way other women knew their mother's voice, intimately, instinctively, with every nerve ending tuned to its particular metallic scrape. She was already seated at the kitchen table, hands folded in her lap, spine straight, eyes fixed on the plate in front of her. The food had been set out 12 minutes ago. It was getting cold. That would be a problem. The bruise on her left wrist throbbed beneath the sleeve of her sweater. 3 days old now, yellowing at the edges. She had learned over the years to catalog her injuries the way a gardener might track the seasons. This one blooming, that one fading, always another on its way. The front door opened. She did not look up. Heavy footsteps crossed the entryway. The sound of a briefcase being set down. Keys dropped into the ceramic bowl by the door. The one her mother had painted before she died, back when Hillary was still young enough to believe that mothers could protect their daughters from fathers. The chicken looks dry. His voice was not loud. It never was. Victor Aldridge did not need volume to terrify. He had learned long ago that the quietest words cut deepest, that a whisper could break a bone. I followed the recipe exactly, Hillary said. Her voice was even, measured. She had spent years learning how to flatten her tone, how to remove any trace of emotion that might be interpreted as defiance. Did I ask for an excuse? No. He appeared in her peripheral vision, tall, broad-shouldered, gray creeping into the temples of his dark hair. At 54, Victor Aldridge was still a handsome man. The neighbors thought so. The women at his office thought so. They did not know about the lock on his daughter's bedroom door. They did not know about the bars on her windows, painted white to match the trim, invisible from the street. They did not know that Hillary had not left this house alone in 7 years. He sat down across from her. She could feel his eyes moving over her face, searching for cracks, for weakness, for any sign that something inside her was still alive enough to crush. She gave him nothing. Look at me when I'm speaking to you. She raised her eyes, met his gaze, held it. Something flickered in his expression, not anger, not yet, something closer to satisfaction. He liked this, she knew, the control, the slow, methodical process of turning a human being into a ghost. I have a dinner meeting tomorrow night, he said, picking up his fork. You will not leave your room. Yes, Father. You will not turn on the television. Yes, Father. You will not make any noise. Yes, Father. He took a bite of the chicken, chewed slowly, swallowed. She watched his throat move, felt her own pulse beating against the bruise on her wrist. Adequate, he said finally. Though you should have seared it longer. I'll remember for next time. He nodded, returned to his meal. The conversation was over. Hillary picked up her own fork and began to eat, her movements mechanical, automatic. She had perfected the art of eating without tasting, of breathing without feeling, of existing without living. It was the only way to survive. Later, after the dishes were washed and put away, after Victor had retreated to his study with his whiskey and his ledgers, Hillary climbed the stairs to her bedroom. She moved quietly. She always moved quietly, her bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floors. The hallway was dark. Her father preferred it that way. Said electricity was expensive. Said she didn't need light to find her own room. The truth was simpler. Darkness was another form of control, another way to keep her disoriented, dependent, afraid. She reached her door, turned the handle, stepped inside. The lock clicked behind her, not from the inside, There was no lock on the inside. The mechanism was external, controlled by a keypad that only her father knew the code to. Every night at 9 p.m., the door sealed itself. Every morning at 7 a.m., it released her. In between, she was a prisoner. Hillary stood in the center of her room and breathed. The space was small but clean, a twin bed with white sheets, a dresser with 3 drawers, a desk she was not allowed to use, no computer, no phone, no connection to the world outside these walls. The window looked out over the backyard, but the bars prevented her from opening it more than 2 inches, just enough air to breathe, never enough to escape. She walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into evening. She could see lights coming on in other houses, families gathering for dinner, children being called in from play. Normal lives, lived normally, less than 100 feet away. They had no idea. Hillary had stopped hoping for rescue years ago. She had learned that neighbors did not notice what they did not want to see, that bruises could be explained away, that a quiet house was rarely questioned. Her father was respected in this community. A successful accountant, a widower who had dedicated his life to raising his troubled daughter alone. Everyone admired his sacrifice, his patience, his devotion. No one asked why his daughter never left the house. No one asked why she had no friends, no job, no life of her own. No one asked because asking would mean acknowledging that something was wrong, and acknowledging that something was wrong would mean having to do something about it. It was easier to look away. Hillary had stopped blaming them. Blame required energy, and she had learned to conserve every ounce of strength she had. It was the only way to survive. She turned from the window and began her evening routine, changed into her nightclothes, brushed her teeth in the small bathroom attached to her room. The door had been removed years ago, after she had tried to lock herself inside. Checked the bars on the window, not because she thought they might have loosened, but because the ritual gave her something to do. Then she lay down on her bed and stared at the ceiling. Sleep would come eventually. It always did. But first, there would be hours of silence. Hours of listening to the house settle, to her father's footsteps below, to the sound of her own heart beating in the darkness. Hours of remembering what it felt like to be free. She had been 15 when her mother died. Cancer, the doctors said. Quick and cruel. 1 month from diagnosis to funeral. Hillary had held her mother's hand at the end, had promised to be strong, had believed that somehow, some way, everything would be okay. She had not known, then, what her father was capable of. The changes had come slowly at first. New rules about curfew. Restrictions on where she could go, who she could see. He was grieving, she told herself. He was scared of losing her too. She tried to be patient, tried to understand, but the rules kept multiplying. The restrictions kept tightening. By the time she realized what was happening, it was too late. She was 16 years old, and she was a prisoner in her own home. She had tried to escape, twice. The first time, she had made it 3 blocks before he found her. The second time, she had almost reached the police station. She did not try a third time. Her father had made certain of that. Now she lay in the darkness and listened to the house breathe, and she thought about the years stretching out before her, years of silence, of control, of slow suffocation. She thought about the chicken that had been too dry, about the bruise on her wrist, about the lock clicking shut at exactly 9 p.m. She thought about dying, not actively, not with any intention, but the thought was there, hovering at the edges of her consciousness, whispering that there were ways out of cages that did not involve doors. She pushed it away. She always pushed it away, but it was getting harder. Every day, it was getting a little bit harder. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. Footsteps on pavement. The murmur of voices. Normal sounds of a normal night in a normal neighborhood. Hillary closed her eyes and waited for morning. The new neighbor moved in on a Tuesday. Hillary watched from her window as the moving truck pulled up to the house next door, a modest colonial that had been empty for 6 months, ever since old Mrs. Patterson had died and her children had sold it. The for sale sign had come down a week ago, but Hillary had not seen any activity until now. She pressed closer to the glass, curious despite herself. New neighbors were rare entertainment in her world. She knew she should not get invested. They would be like all the others, friendly at first, then gradually pulling away as her father's charm worked its magic and his lies took root. But she could not help watching. The moving men were efficient, carrying boxes and furniture into the house with practiced ease. But the man directing them was different. He stood on the front lawn with his arms crossed, his posture relaxed but somehow alert. He was older than her, she could tell, maybe mid-30s, maybe more. Dark hair, just long enough to be unfashionable. A face that might have been handsome if it were not so utterly still. He was wearing a simple black t-shirt and jeans, nothing remarkable. But there was something about the way he carried himself, the way his eyes moved over his surroundings, the way the moving men seemed to give him slightly more space than necessary, something that made Hillary's instincts prickle. She had learned to read people in the years of her imprisonment. It was a survival skill, understanding the subtle shifts in mood and intention that preceded violence. Her father had taught her that, without meaning to, without knowing it, and she had become fluent in the language of danger. This man spoke that language. She was certain of it, but there was something else too, something she could not quite identify, a stillness in him that was not the stillness of a predator waiting to strike, but something older, something more tired. The stillness of a man who had done terrible things and decided to stop. She did not know how she knew this. She just did. As if sensing her gaze, the man turned and looked directly at her window. Hillary froze. Their eyes met through the glass. For a long moment, neither of them moved. His expression did not change, did not soften or harden, did not reveal anything at all. But Hillary felt the weight of his attention settle over her like a physical thing. Then, slowly, he nodded. Just that, a simple acknowledgement. A recognition that she existed, that she was there, that she was watching. It was the most seen she had felt in 7 years. Before she could react, she heard her father's footsteps on the stairs. She pulled back from the window, arranging her features into their usual blank mask, her heart pounding for reasons she could not explain. The door opened. "There's a new neighbor," Victor said. "I'm going to introduce myself. Stay here." "Yes, Father." He studied her for a moment, his eyes searching her face. Then he nodded, satisfied that she was sufficiently cowed, and left. Hillary listened to his footsteps descend the stairs, listened to the front door open and close. Then she crept back to the window and watched as her father crossed the lawn and approached the new neighbor with his hand extended and his most charming smile in place. The neighbor shook his hand. Victor talked. The neighbor listened. From this distance, Hillary could not hear what was being said, but she could read the body language. Her father's expansive gestures, his easy laughter, the way he leaned in to establish intimacy. And she could read the neighbor's response, polite, contained, giving nothing away. At one point, Victor glanced up at the house, at her window, and said something. The neighbor followed his gaze. Hillary did not move. She watched as her father spoke, probably spinning some story about his troubled daughter, his difficult situation, his boundless patience and devotion. The neighbor listened. His expression did not change. Then he nodded once, said something brief, and turned away. Victor stood there for a moment, clearly surprised. People did not turn away from Victor Aldridge. People did not end conversations before he was ready to end them. But the neighbor was already walking back toward his house, his body language making clear that the interaction was over. Hillary watched her father's face. She knew that expression, that tightening around the eyes, that slight flush along the jaw. Anger, carefully controlled. Victor did not like being dismissed. He did not like feeling small. He would not forget this. He stood on the lawn for another moment, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. Then he turned and walked back to the house, his steps sharp and purposeful. Hillary moved away from the window, made it to her bed, was sitting with a book in her lap, one of the few possessions she was allowed, chosen, and approved by her father. By the time she heard his footsteps on the stairs, the door opened. "Our new neighbor is reserved," Victor said. His voice was pleasant, but Hillary heard the edge beneath it. "He won't be joining us for dinner anytime soon." "That's too bad," she said automatically. Victor studied her. His eyes narrowed slightly. You were watching us from the window. It was not a question. Hillary felt her stomach drop, but she kept her expression neutral. I was curious about the noise. Curious. He repeated the word slowly, tasting it. You know what I've told you about curiosity, Hillary? Yes, Father. Remind me. She set the book aside, folded her hands in her lap. Curiosity is how people get hurt. That's right. He stepped closer. His shadow fell across her bed. Curiosity is how people get hurt. And you don't want to get hurt, do you, Hillary? No, Father. Good girl. He reached out and touched her hair, gently, affectionately, the gesture of a loving parent comforting a beloved child. We wouldn't want anything to happen to you. Not when I've worked so hard to keep you safe. I know, Father. I do it because I love you. You understand that, don't you? Yes, Father. He smiled. It was a terrible thing, that smile, full of warmth and tenderness and poison. Good girl, he said again. Now come downstairs. It's time to start dinner. He left. Hillary sat on her bed for a moment longer, her hands trembling in her lap. Then she stood and followed him down the stairs, back to her cage, back to her chains. But something had shifted. Something small. Something she could not quite name. A hairline crack in the wall she had built around her heart. The new neighbor had seen her, and for the first time in 7 years, Hillary wondered if anyone might actually look. His name was Roa Cross. Hillary learned this 2 days later, when her father came home from work complaining about a parking dispute. The new neighbor had taken the spot in front of his own house, the spot Victor had been using for years, ever since he decided his driveway was too narrow for his new sedan. The man has no consideration, Victor said over dinner. I explained the situation to him very clearly. Told him I'd been using that spot for years. Do you know what he said? Hillary shook her head. He said, then I suppose it's time for a change. Victor's fork clattered against his plate. Just like that, calm as you please, as if I were the unreasonable one. That's very rude, Hillary said, because it was expected. Roa Cross. Victor pronounced the name like a curse. That's his name, Roa Cross. What kind of name is that? Sounds like a character in a bad novel. Hillary said nothing, but inside she repeated the syllables to herself. Roa Cross, a name that sounded like shadows and endings and things half buried in the dark. He's from the city, apparently. Some kind of early retirement, though God knows what he did to afford that house at his age. Victor was still talking, still complaining, but Hillary had stopped listening. Her mind was on the window, on the man who had stood in his front yard and looked at her as if she were real, as if she mattered. Roa Cross. She wondered what he had done before his early retirement. She wondered if it was something bad. She wondered if it was something worse than bad, and she wondered why. Despite everything she knew about dangerous men, she was not afraid of him. The weeks passed. Hillary watched from her window as Roa Cross settled into his new home. He kept strange hours, leaving early in the morning, returning late at night, sometimes not appearing for days at a time. His house had no curtains on the lower windows, and she could see him moving through the rooms, always alone. He did not have visitors. He did not host parties. He did not mow his lawn on Sunday mornings like the other men on the street. Instead, he seemed to exist in his own separate reality, touching the neighborhood without ever quite belonging to it. Just like her. Sometimes, when she was at the window, he would be in his yard or walking to his car. And sometimes, not always, but often enough to feel like a pattern, he would look up at her. That same steady gaze, that same small nod. Hillary never nodded back. She was not brave enough for that, but she did not look away either. It was the closest thing to rebellion she had allowed herself in years. Her father noticed the interest. Of course he did. Victor noticed everything. You've been spending a lot of time at that window, he observed one evening. I like watching the birds, Hillary said. It was not entirely a lie. There was a cardinal that nested in the oak tree between Surwa, the two properties, and she had grown fond of its daily visits. Victor studied her. His eyes were cold, calculating. She could see him weighing her response, looking for deception. The birds, he repeated. Yes, and nothing else. Nothing else. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Good, because I would hate to think you were developing distractions. I'm not. Good. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening street, at the house next door, at the light burning in Rowcross's kitchen. I don't like him. There's something off about him, something dangerous. Hillary said nothing. Stay away from him, Hillary. Do you understand? Yes, Father. I mean it. If I find out you've been communicating with him, if I find out you've so much as waved at him through that window, there will be consequences. Do you understand? Yes, Father. He turned back to face her. His expression was calm, controlled, but she could see the violence simmering beneath the surface. The promise of pain. I'm only trying to protect you, he said. You know that, don't you? The world is full of dangerous people. Men who would take advantage of a sweet girl like you. I'm the only one who truly has your best interests at heart. I know, Father. I love you, Hillary. I love you too, Father. The words came automatically, mechanical, empty of meaning. She had learned long ago that it was easier to say them than to fight, easier to lie than to resist. Victor smiled, satisfied. He crossed the room and kissed her forehead, his lips dry and cold against her skin. That's my girl, he said. Now go to bed. You have a long day tomorrow. She climbed the stairs to her room, heard the lock click behind her, stood in the darkness, and breathed. Through the window, she could see Rowcross's house. The kitchen light was still on. As she watched, a figure passed by the window, just a silhouette there and gone, and she felt something loosen in her chest. He was there. She did not know why that mattered. She did not know why the simple fact of his existence, his proximity, his continued presence felt like oxygen to a drowning woman. But it did. For the first time in years, she did not feel entirely alone. Rowcross did not believe in coincidences. He had spent too many years in a world where nothing happened by accident, where every chance meeting was a trap and every friendly overture was a threat. That world was behind him now, or so he kept telling himself. But the habits remained, the vigilance, the suspicion, the bone-deep certainty that something was always wrong. When he bought the house on Maple Street, he had been looking for peace, a quiet place to disappear, to let the years wash away the blood on his hands, to become the kind of man who mowed his lawn and waved to neighbors and died in his sleep at 85. But peace, he was learning, was hard to find. The neighborhood was exactly what he had expected. Neat houses, manicured lawns, children playing in the streets, normal people living normal lives, the kind of people he had spent 20 years protecting and exploiting and occasionally destroying. The kind of people who had no idea that monsters walked among them. He had been here for 3 weeks when he first noticed the girl. She was at the window of the house next door, her face pale against the glass, just standing there. Watching, not moving, not smiling, just existing. There was something about her that caught his attention, something in the stillness of her posture, the careful blankness of her expression. He had seen that look before, on the faces of women who had learned that visibility was dangerous, that presence invited punishment. He had seen that look on the faces of people who were trapped. His neighbor, the man who had introduced himself as Victor Aldridge with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, had mentioned a daughter. Troubled, he had said, with the performative weariness of a long-suffering parent. She has issues, mental health problems. I've had to make sacrifices to care for her. Roa had nodded politely and said nothing. He did not trust men who spoke about their children's struggles with strangers. He did not trust men who smiled that way. Now, watching the girl in the window, he understood why. It started with small things, the way she flinched when her father's car pulled into the driveway, the way she never left the house alone, never walked to the mailbox, never stood in the yard, the bars on her window, painted white to blend in but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Roa noticed everything. It was what he had been trained to do. Years of running the Blackhand family's operations had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. He could read a room in seconds, identify threats before they materialized, sense lies the way other men sensed rain. And everything about Victor Aldridge screamed liar. He watched, listened, paid attention, The girl, Hillary, her name was Hillary, had been removed from school at 16 after her mother's death. Homeschooled, the neighbors said, though no one had ever seen a tutor come or go. She did not have friends, did not have visitors, did not exist in any of the ways that young women were supposed to exist. Her father spoke about her with the rehearsed concern of a man used to lying. He mentioned her mental health issues to anyone who would listen, painting a picture of a fragile, unstable daughter who required constant supervision. The neighbors nodded sympathetically and never thought to question why the supervision looked so much like imprisonment. Roa thought about it. He thought about it constantly. He thought about the bars on her window, the lock on her door. He had noticed the keypad one evening when Victor left the house in a hurry and forgot to close the blinds. He thought about the way she moved, the careful way she held herself, the defensive posture of a woman who expected pain. He thought about what he wanted to do to Victor Aldridge. The thoughts were vivid and detailed and brought him a satisfaction that he knew was dangerous. He was supposed to be done with this. He was supposed to be retired. But every time he saw Hillary at the window, every time he noticed a new bruise or a fresh flinch, the old instincts roared back to life. He was not a hero. He had never been a hero. He had been a fixer, an enforcer, a man who solved problems with violence and made other problems disappear. The world he had come from did not have heroes, only predators of different stripes, fighting over territory and power. But he remembered his sister. He remembered what had happened to her, what had been done to her, how he had been too young and too weak to stop it. He remembered the promise he had made to himself, the night he buried her, that he would never stand by while someone was being destroyed. He had broken that promise many times. He had stood by while innocent people suffered, had allowed terrible things to happen because it served his interests, had chosen power over principle again and again. But not this time. This time he would do something different. This time he would be someone different. He just had to figure out how. The opportunity came in early November. Roa was returning from a late run, one of the habits he had kept from his old life, the ritual of pushing his body until his mind went quiet. When he heard it, shouting. It was coming from the Aldridge house. Victor's voice, raised in anger, loud enough to carry through the walls and into the cold night air. Roa stopped at the edge of his driveway, listened. Told you not to touch my things. How many times do I have to explain this to you? How many times? A crash. The sound of something breaking. Then silence. Roa stood perfectly still, his breath fogging in the darkness. He counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, nothing. He should go inside. He should mind his own business. He should remember that he was retired, that this was not his problem, that getting involved would only lead to complications. But he was already moving. Not toward the house. Not yet. That would be too obvious, too confrontational. Instead, he walked to the fence that separated their properties, positioned himself in the shadow of a large oak tree, and waited. The light in Hillary's room was on. He could see it glowing behind the barred window, a small rectangle of yellow against the dark face of the house. As he watched, a shadow moved across it. Then another. The shadow was shaped like a man. Roa's hands curled into fists at his sides. The old instincts were screaming now, demanding action, demanding violence. He forced himself to breathe, to wait. The light went out. For a long moment, there was nothing, just darkness and silence and the pounding of his own heart. Then the back door opened, and Victor Aldridge stepped onto the porch. He was carrying a glass of whiskey. His shirt was untucked, his hair disheveled. In the faint light from the kitchen, Roa could see the flush of anger on his face, the satisfaction in his eyes, the satisfaction of a man who had just exerted control. Victor walked to the edge of the porch and stood there, looking out at the night. He took a long sip of his drink, rolled his shoulders, as if releasing tension. He did not see Roa in the shadows. He did not see anything but his own reflection in the glass, his own power, his own sick pleasure. Roa watched him. In his mind, he was already planning a dozen different ways to end this, to make Victor Aldridge pay for what he had done. Quick ways and slow ways, clean ways and messy ways, ways that would leave evidence and ways that would leave nothing at all. But he did not move, not yet, because he had learned over the years that the most effective violence was the kind that came with precision, the kind that waited for the perfect moment, the perfect leverage, the perfect angle of attack. And because he knew that if he acted now, If he gave in to the rage that was burning in his chest, he would not be able to stop, so he waited, and he watched, and he made a promise to the girl in the dark room above. I see you, I know, and I'm going to help you, whether you want it or not. The next time it happened, Roa was ready. He had spent the weeks since that first incident preparing. Not in obvious ways. He was not a fool, but in the subtle, patient ways of a man who had made a career out of anticipating violence. He had learned Victor's schedule. When he left for work, when he returned, which nights he stayed late, which nights he came home early, when the shouting was most likely, when the silence fell heavy and dangerous. He had learned Hillary's rhythms too. The hours she was allowed downstairs, the times she appeared at the window, the mornings when her face was pale and her movements stiff. He had obtained copies of the house's blueprints from the county records office, noted the locations of doors and windows, the placement of rooms, the vulnerabilities in the structure's security. And he had retrieved some things from a storage unit in the city. Things he had hoped he would never need again. Tools of his former trade, kept as insurance against a world that never stopped being dangerous. He was not planning to use them. He was just planning to be prepared. It was a Thursday night when everything changed. November had turned bitter, the kind of cold that seeped through walls and settled in bones. Roa was in his living room pretending to read a book he had not absorbed a word of when he heard the first shout. Then, the scream. He was out the door before the sound finished echoing. The night was dark, moonless, the streetlights doing little to penetrate the gloom. Roa crossed his yard in seconds, vaulted the fence between the properties, and landed in the Aldridge's backyard in a crouch. The screaming had stopped, but he could hear voices now. Victor's, raised in rage, and another sound, a whimper, high and thin and terrified. The back door was locked. Roa did not slow down. He pulled a slim metal tool from his pocket, old habits, and had the lock picked in under 3 seconds. The door swung open. He stepped into the kitchen. The house was dark except for a light at the top of the stairs. Roa moved through the shadows, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floor. Oh. He had done this 1,000 times before, in 1,000 different houses. The muscle memory was still there, waiting. He reached the bottom of the stairs, looked up. Victor Aldridge was standing in the hallway above, his back to Roa. His attention focused on something in front of him. His body was rigid with anger, his hands clenched at his sides. And on the floor in front of him, pressed against the wall, was Hillary. She was curled into herself, arms wrapped around her head, trying to make herself small. There was blood on her face, a split lip maybe, or a cut above her eye, and her whole body was shaking. Victor was speaking. His voice was low now, controlled, the quiet fury that Roa had learned to recognize as the most dangerous kind. Think you can disobey me, after everything I've done for you, after everything I've sacrificed? Hillary did not respond. She just stayed curled on the floor, trembling. Look at me when I'm speaking to you. She did not move. I said. Victor reached down and grabbed her arm, hauling her up. Look at me. Roa climbed the stairs. He moved without hurry, without sound. Each step was measured, deliberate. He had learned long ago that the most terrifying approach was the calm one, the one that said, I am not rushing because I do not need to, because the outcome is already decided. Victor did not hear him until he was 3 steps away. Then he turned. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, anger, fear. The fear was the most satisfying. It flickered across his features like lightning, there and gone, replaced by defensive bluster. What the hell are you doing in my house? Roa stopped. He looked at Victor Aldridge, at the flush of rage on his cheeks, the spittle at the corners of his mouth, the hand still gripping Hillary's arm, hard enough to leave marks. Then he looked at Hillary. She was staring at him with wide eyes, her face pale, beneath the blood. She looked terrified. She looked like she had no idea whether he was salvation or just another threat. Roa held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned his attention back to Victor. When he spoke, his voice was soft, calm. The voice of a man who had stood over the bodies of his enemies and felt nothing at all. Let go of her. Victor's grip tightened. Who do you think you are? This is my house. Daughter, you have no right. Let go. Something in Roa's tone made Victor's words die in his throat. The fear was back now, stronger, fighting against the anger for control of his face. I'll call the police, Victor said. I'll have you arrested for breaking and entering, for trespassing, for... Roa moved. It was not fast, not violent. He simply stepped forward and wrapped his hand around Victor's wrist, the one still holding Hillary, and squeezed. Not hard enough to break, just hard enough to make a point. Victor gasped. His fingers loosened involuntarily, and Hillary pulled away, stumbling back against the wall. Roa did not let go of Victor's wrist. Listen to me very carefully, he said. His voice was still soft, still calm. I'm only going to say this once. Victor's face was white now. All the bluster had drained out of him, leaving something small and scared behind. The face of a coward confronted with genuine power. I know what you are, Roa continued. I know what you've done. To her, for years. I know about the locks and the bars, wabors and the bruises you give her when no one is watching. You don't know anything. Roa squeezed harder. Victor whimpered. I know, Roa said, because I've spent the last 2 months watching you, learning your patterns, documenting your crimes, and if I can do that... He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. Imagine what else I can do. Victor's breath was coming in short, panicked gasps now. Who are you? Roa smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had buried bodies in shallow graves and slept soundly afterward. I'm the man who's going to make sure you never hurt her again. He released Victor's wrist. Victor stumbled back, cradling his arm against his chest. Don't touch her again, Roa said. The words were quiet, almost gentle. If you do, if you so much as raise your voice to her, I will know, and I will come back, and what happens next will not be a conversation. Victor opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. You can't... This is my house. She's my daughter. Not anymore. Roa turned to Hillary. She was still pressed against the wall, her eyes huge in her pale face. She had not moved, had not spoken, had barely seemed to breathe. Come with me, Roa said. She did not move. You don't have to, he added. This isn't an order. It's an offer. You can stay here if that's what you want. I won't force you. But if you want to leave, if you want to be somewhere safe, I'm offering you that. Hillary looked at him, then at her father, then back at him. I don't... Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. I don't know you. No, you don't. How do I know? How do I know you're not worse? It was a fair question, a smart question. Roa felt a flicker of respect beneath the cold anger that was still burning in his chest. You don't, he said honestly. You don't know anything about me. I could be lying. I could be exactly what he says I am, a dangerous man who wants to take advantage of you. Victor made a noise of agreement, starting to regain his courage now that Roa's attention was elsewhere. That's right. You see what I've been protecting you from? Men like him. Shut up, Roa said without looking at him. Victor fell silent. Here's what I can tell you, Roa continued, his eyes still on Hillary. I'm not going to make you any promises. I'm not going to tell you everything will be okay, or that I'll save you, or that we'll live happily ever after. I don't believe in that kind of thing. He paused. Let the words sink in. But I can tell you this. If you come with me, you will have a door that locks from the inside. You will have food you choose for yourself. You will have silence when you want it and company when you don't. And no one... His voice hardened. No one will ever touch you without your permission again. Hillary stared at him. Behind her, Victor was edging toward the stairs, his eyes calculating, looking for an opportunity. Roa tracked the movement without appearing to. This is insane, Victor said. His voice was steadier now, gaining confidence as the immediate threat seemed to recede. You break into my home, assault me, try to kidnap my daughter. The police will hear about this. My lawyers will destroy you. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Roa finally looked at him. Victor, he said, I spent 20 years as an enforcer for the Black Hand crime family. I have put men in the ground for looking at my bosses the wrong way. I have done things that would turn your hair white and your blood cold, and I walked away from all of it with money in the bank and not a single charge on my record. He let that sink in. Do you really think your lawyers scare me? Victor's confidence evaporated. He took a step back, nearly tripping on the top stair. Now, Roe continued, I'm going to give your daughter a moment to make her decision, and while she's deciding, you're going to stand there quietly. Because if you don't, if you say one more word, I'm going to revisit my policy of nonviolence, and you will not enjoy the experience. Victor stood there quietly. Roa turned back to Hillary. She was crying, silent tears running down her face, mixing with the blood from the cut above her eye. But she was not sobbing, not falling apart. She was just standing there, tears streaming, looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. It's your choice, he said softly. No one is going to make it for you. Not me, not him. You decide what happens next. Hillary looked at her father. She looked at the hallway she had walked down every day for 7 years, the walls that had witnessed her captivity, the prison she had learned to call home. She looked at Roa, a stranger, a confessed criminal, a man who had just admitted to terrible things with no trace of shame. And then she looked at the door, at the end of the hall. The door that led downstairs, through the kitchen, out into the night. The door that, for the first time in years, was not locked. Okay, she whispered. Roa nodded. He did not smile, did not celebrate, did not make any move that might spook her. He simply stepped aside and gestured toward the stairs. After you. Hillary walked past him on shaking legs. As she passed her father, Victor reached out, reflexively maybe, or maybe one last attempt at control, and grabbed her wrist. Hillary, please. She stopped, looked down at his hand on her arm, looked up at his face, and for the first time in 7 years she spoke to him without fear. Let go. Victor's hand fell away. Hillary continued down the stairs. Roa followed. At the bottom she paused, looked back up at her father, who was standing at the top of the stairs, his face twisted with rage and fear and something that might have been grief. Goodbye, father, she said. Then she walked out the door. The night air hit Hillary like a slap. She stood on the back porch of her father's house, her prison, and breathed. Cold November wind, smelling of dead leaves and distant wood smoke. Stars overhead, sharp and clear against the black sky. The sounds of a sleeping neighborhood, a dog barking somewhere, the hum of a distant highway, the rustle of branches in the wind. Normal things, simple things, things she had not experienced in years. Behind her, Roa emerged from the house. He closed the door quietly, then stood beside her, not speaking. They remained like that for a long moment, two strangers in the dark, standing on the edge of something neither of them fully understood. Where do we go? Hillary finally asked. My house, Roa said. For now, you can stay as long as you need to figure out your next steps. And then? That's up to you. She turned to look at him. In the faint light from the street, his face was all shadows and angles, impossible to read. Why are you doing this? It was the question she had been wanting to ask since he appeared in the hallway, since he looked at her father with eyes like winter and said, "Don't touch her again," in a voice that promised death. Roa was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, distant. I had a sister once. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Hillary understood, in the way that only people who had survived certain kinds of darkness could understand. I'm sorry, she said. So am I. He shook his head slightly, as if clearing away memories. Come on, let's get you inside. His house was warm. That was the first thing Hillary noticed when she stepped through the door. Not just temperature warm, though it was that too, after the bitter cold outside, but warm in a different way, comfortable. Lived in, the furniture was simple but good quality. Dark leather couch, wooden coffee table, bookshelves lining one wall. A kitchen she could see through an open doorway, clean and functional. Stairs leading up to a second floor she could not see from here. No bars on the windows, no locks on the doors, or rather, locks that faced the right direction, locks that kept the outside out, rather than the inside in. She stood in the entryway and did not know what to do with herself. The guest room is upstairs, Roa said. Second door on the left. Bathroom is across the hall. There are towels in the cabinet if you want to shower. Hillary nodded but did not move. There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry. Help yourself to whatever you want." She still did not move. Roa studied her for a moment, then he walked past her into the living room and sat down on the couch. Picked up a book from the side table, opened it to a marked page. "I'll be here if you need anything," he said. "Take your time." He began to read. Hillary stood in the entryway for another long moment, uncertain, off balance. She had spent so many years being told what to do, where to go, how to behave. The absence of instruction was almost more terrifying than the captivity had been. But Roa was not telling her what to do. He was not even looking at her. He was just there. Present but not demanding. Available but not imposing. Slowly, carefully, Hillary moved. She went to the kitchen first. Opened the refrigerator, something she had not been allowed to do without permission for years. Inside she found normal things. Milk, eggs, vegetables. Leftover takeout in plastic containers. She closed it without taking anything. Then opened a cabinet. Dishes, another cabinet. Glasses. She took down a glass and filled it with water from the tap. Drank it slowly, standing at the sink, looking out the window at the dark backyard. The water tasted like freedom. She did not sleep that first night. The guest room was small, but clean, with a bed covered in a blue quilt and a window that looked out over the street. She sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at the door. It had a lock, a simple deadbolt, the kind you could slide with your thumb. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated. She got up and locked it, then unlocked it, then locked it again. Then she sat back down on the bed and cried. Not loud, gasping sobs. She had learned long ago to cry quietly, to muffle her grief so it would not invite punishment. But the tears came anyway, running down her face and soaking into the collar of her shirt. She cried for the years she had lost, for the mother she had never properly mourned, for the girl she might have been. If things had been different, she cried until there was nothing left, until she was empty and hollow and exhausted. Then she lay down on the bed, fully clothed, and watched the ceiling until dawn. The days that followed were strange. Hillary existed in a kind of limbo, suspended between the life she had left and the life she did not yet know how to build. She moved through Roa's house like a ghost, touching things lightly, afraid to disturb anything, afraid to take up too much space. He gave her room, never pushed, never pressed, never asked questions she was not ready to answer. He cooked meals and left food for her in the refrigerator. He came and went on his own schedule, sometimes gone for hours, sometimes present, but absorbed in his own thoughts. When they did interact, it was brief, practical. "There's coffee if you want it." "I'm going out. Do you need anything?" "The library is 2 blocks east if you want to walk there." Simple offerings, no strings attached. The library. Hillary thought about it for 3 days before she worked up the courage to go. It seemed absurd, walking 2 blocks, visiting a public building, doing something normal people did every day. But for her, it was an expedition into unknown territory. She stood at the front door of Roa's house for 15 minutes, her hand on the knob, her heart pounding. Then she turned it and stepped outside. The air was cold. The sky was gray. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as it always had. The same houses, the same cars, the same mailboxes lining the curb. But everything was different. She was outside, alone, walking where she chose to walk, going where she chose to go. The library was a small brick building on the corner of Maple and Oak. Hillary walked through the front door, and the smell of old books washed over her like a wave. She had loved libraries once, before, when her mother was alive and the world was still full of possibilities. She found a chair in a quiet corner and sat there for 3 hours, not reading, just being, existing in a public space, watching other people come and go, remembering what it felt like to be part of the world. When she finally walked back to Roa's house, she felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. Small, fragile, terrifying. But there, on the 5th day, Roa sat her down in the living room. "We need to talk," he said. "About what comes next?" Hillary felt her stomach clench with fear. She had been waiting for this, the moment when the bill came due, when she found out what he really wanted from her. But his face was calm, neutral, no hidden agenda lurking behind his eyes. "Your father isn't going to stay quiet forever," he said. Right now, he's scared. He doesn't know who I am, what I'm capable of. But fear fades. Eventually, he'll get angry enough to do something stupid. Like what? Call the police, claim you were kidnapped, try to take you back by force. The fear was sharper now, a knife twisting in her gut. What do I do? That's what we need to figure out. Roa leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You're 22, a legal adult. He can't compel you to return, but he could make your life difficult. Try to get you declared mentally unfit, file false reports, use his connections to turn people against you. He will, Hillary said quietly. He's good at that, making people believe him. I know, which is why we need to build your case. Document what he did to you, gather evidence. Create a paper trail that will protect you if things get legal. How? Photographs of the injuries, for starters. A written statement of what happened, in your own words. Medical records if we can get them. And eventually, maybe... He paused, watching her face. You might want to consider talking to the police. No. The word came out fast, instinctive. No police. Okay, Roa said. Not now. Maybe not ever. That's your choice. They wouldn't believe me anyway. He's respected. He's charming. They'd think I was crazy, just like everyone else does. Maybe, or maybe not, but that's not a decision you have to make today. Roa sat back. For now, let's focus on the basics. Get you a phone, a bank account, things that give you independence, options. Hillary stared at him. Why are you doing all this? I told you I had a sister. No, I mean... She struggled to find the words. All of this, the room, the food, the help, you don't know me. You have no reason to care what happens to me. Roa was quiet for a long moment. I spent 20 years hurting people, he finally said. Some of them deserved it, most of them didn't. I did it because it was my job, because it was what I was good at, because I told myself it didn't matter who got caught in the crossfire. He looked away, toward the window, toward the gray sky outside. But it did matter. It always mattered. And I can't undo any of it. Can't bring back the people I hurt. Can't erase the damage I caused. All I can do is try to be different now. Try to put something good into the world instead of taking things out of it. He looked back at her. You asked me why I'm doing this. That's the reason. Not because you owe me anything. Not because I expect anything in return. Just because it's the right thing to do, and I've spent too many years doing the wrong ones. Hillary did not know what to say. So she said nothing, just sat there, looking at this strange, dangerous, inexplicably kind man. And for the first time since she walked out of her father's house, she thought maybe, just maybe, she had not made a mistake. The weeks turned into months. Hillary's life took on a rhythm, fragile and new. She got a phone, a simple one, nothing fancy but hers. She opened a bank account with money Roa gave her, refusing to tell her where it came from, but insisting she could pay him back whenever she was ready. She went to the library every day, reading voraciously, making up for years of intellectual starvation. She started to remember what it felt like to be a person. Roa was a constant presence, but not an intrusive one. He maintained his own schedule, his own routines. Sometimes he was gone for days, doing things he did not explain, and she did not ask about. When he was home, they orbited each other carefully, sharing meals occasionally, exchanging brief conversations, existing in parallel. He never touched her without permission, never entered her room without knocking, never made any demand, any request, any suggestion that implied expectation. It was the strangest thing Hillary had ever experienced. She had spent so long being controlled that freedom felt like walking on ice. Beautiful, but precarious, liable to crack at any moment. She kept waiting for the trap to spring, for Roa to reveal his true intentions, for the safety to prove illusory. But it did not happen. Days turned to weeks, weeks turned to months, and slowly, painfully, Hillary began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was real. The first time she laughed, it surprised her so much, she started crying. It was a stupid thing. Roa had dropped a carton of eggs on the kitchen floor and cursed so creatively that she could not help herself. The laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, somewhere she had forgotten existed. Roa looked at her with an expression somewhere between amusement and concern. Are you okay? She was not okay. She was standing in a kitchen full of broken eggs, laughing and crying at the same time, feeling like her chest was going to split open from the force of emotions she did not know how to process. But she nodded anyway. "I'm okay," she said. I'm okay." And for the first time in 7 years, she almost believed it. The Mafia came calling in February. Hillary was in the living room reading when she heard the car pull up outside. Heavy engine, expensive sound, not the kind of vehicle that belonged in this neighborhood. Roa was in the kitchen, but he appeared in the doorway before she could call to him. His face was calm, but there was something different in his eyes, a sharpness, an alertness that she had not seen since the night he had come to her father's house. "Go upstairs," he said quietly. "Lock your door. Don't come out until I come get you." "What is it?" "Old friends." "Why?" Word was heavy with irony. "Go, now." She went. From her room she could hear voices downstairs, men's voices, deep and rough. Roa's, calm and controlled. She could not make out the words, but she could read the tone. Careful, measured, dangerous. An hour passed. Then the front door opened, closed. The heavy engine started up again, faded into the distance. Footsteps on the stairs. A knock on her door. "It's me," Roa said. Hillary unlocked the door. He was standing in the hallway, looking tired but unhurt. "Who were they?" "People from my old life." He ran a hand through his hair. "They wanted to know why I'm still in the area, why I haven't moved on." "What did you tell them?" "That it's none of their business." Hillary studied his face. "Are they going to be a problem?" "Maybe, probably." He sighed umptily. "I made a lot of enemies over the years. And I made some friends too, the kind of friends who don't like it when you walk away." "What does that mean? For you, for this?" "For me," she did not say, but the question hung in the air between them. Roa met her eyes. "It means things might get complicated, but it doesn't change anything. You're safe here. I'll make sure of it." "How?" He smiled, just slightly. "I may be retired, but I'm not dead. And the people who might want to hurt you know better than to try." Hillary was not sure if that was reassuring or terrifying. Maybe both. More visitors came over the following weeks. Some in expensive cars, some in unmarked vans. Some stayed for hours, some left within minutes. Roa never introduced any of them to Hillary, never explained who they were or what they wanted. But she noticed things, the way they looked at him, with respect, with fear, sometimes with something like affection, the way they deferred to him, even though he had supposedly left that life behind, the way they called him names that were not his name, boss, sir, Mr. Cross. She noticed too the way they looked at her when they caught glimpses of her, curious, calculating, assessing. She did not like it. One night, after another visitor had come and gone, she finally asked him directly, "Who are you, really?" Roa set down the glass of whiskey he had been nursing. "I told you who I was. You told me you were an enforcer. You said you worked for the Blackhand family." She sat down across from him. "But that's not all of it, is it?" He was quiet for a long moment. "No," he finally admitted. "That's not all of it." "Tell me." He studied her face. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to find it. "I ran the Blackhand family's operations for 15 years, he said. "By the end, I was essentially second in command. When the old boss died, there were some who wanted me to take over." "Why didn't you?" "Because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life surrounded by blood. Because I looked at where I was heading and didn't like what I saw." He picked up his glass again, swirled the amber liquid. "Because I remembered my sister and thought about all the sisters I had destroyed, all the daughters and mothers and wives, and I couldn't do it anymore. So you just walked away." "It's not that simple. There were negotiations, arrangements. I handed over my territories, gave up my claims, made it clear I wasn't going to be a threat. In exchange, they let me leave in peace. But they're still coming to see you. Old habits, old loyalties." He shrugged. "Some of them just want to pay their respects. Some of them want advice. And some of them," his expression hardened, "are testing the waters, seeing if I've really gone soft." "Have you?" The question hung in the air. "I don't know," Roa said honestly. I'd like to think so, but then I think about your father and what I wanted to do to him that night, and I'm not so sure. Hillary thought about that night too. The calm in his voice as he made his threat, the certainty in his eyes. What stopped you? You did. He met her gaze. If I had killed him, you would have been afraid of me, and I didn't want that. I wanted... He stopped, shook his head. What? What did you want? I wanted to be someone you could trust, someone who could help you without becoming another monster in your life. Hillary felt something shift in her chest, something warm and unfamiliar. You're not a monster, she said quietly. I've done monstrous things. That's not the same. She leaned forward. A monster wouldn't care about being one. A monster wouldn't try to be different. Roa looked at her for a long moment. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. You're very kind, he said finally, considering everything you've been through. I'm not kind. I'm just... observant. She allowed herself a small smile. I've had a lot of practice. The months continued to pass. Spring came, then summer. Hillary found a job at the library. Part-time, nothing special, but her own. She opened a savings account with her first paycheck. Felt the thrill of money she had earned herself, landing in an account that bore her name. She started seeing a therapist. On Roa's suggestion. A kind woman named Dr. Reeves, who listened without judgment and never pushed harder than Hillary could handle. Slowly, session by session, Hillary began to understand the shape of her trauma, the ways it had warped her perception of herself and the world. She learned that what her father had done to her had a name: coercive control. She learned that she was not crazy, not broken, not the troubled daughter he had convinced everyone she was. She learned that survival was not weakness, and silence was not consent, and the things she had done to stay alive did not diminish her worth as a human being. It was hard, the hardest thing she had ever done, harder even than walking out of that house. But with each session, each small revelation, each tiny step forward, she felt herself becoming more real, more solid, more her. And through it all, Roa was there. Not pushing, not crowding, just present. A steady point of reference in a shifting world. She was not in love with him. She knew that, was careful about it. She was too fragile for love, too newly emerged from the chrysalis of her captivity, to trust herself with that kind of vulnerability. But she cared about him, depended on him, felt safe with him in a way she had never felt safe with anyone. And she thought, she was almost certain, that he felt the same. One night, late, she came downstairs to find him sitting in the dark. The living room was unlit, but she could see his silhouette in the faint glow from the streetlights outside. He was sitting on the couch, not reading, not drinking, just sitting. "Can I join you?" she asked. He looked up. In the darkness, she could not read his expression. "Of course." She sat down on the other end of the couch, leaving space between them. They stayed that way for a while, two figures in the shadows, listening to the silence of the house. "I couldn't sleep," Hillary finally said. "Neither could I." "Bad dreams?" "No dreams at all." He shifted slightly. "That's worse sometimes." The emptiness. Hillary understood. She had spent years in that emptiness, that blank space where hope used to live. "What do you think about?" she asked. "When you can't sleep?" "The past, mostly. The things I've done." A pause. "The things I wish I could undo." "Do you regret it? All of it?" "No, not all of it." His voice was thoughtful, honest. "Some of the people I hurt deserved it. Some of them were worse than me, and the world is better without them. But the others..." He trailed off. "The sisters," Hillary said softly. "The daughters and mothers and wives." "Yes." They sat in silence for another long moment. "I think about my mother," Hillary said eventually. "I wonder sometimes if things would have been different if she had lived, if she would have stopped him, or if she would have become another kind of prison. What do you think?" "I don't know. I want to believe she would have protected me, but she stayed with him for years, knowing what he was, so maybe..." She shook her head. "Maybe there's no version of this story where I wasn't trapped. Maybe some people are just born for cages." "No." Roa's voice was sharp, sudden. "That's not true." "How do you know?" Because you're here, because you walked out, because every day since then you've made choices, your own choices, about who you want to be and how you want to live. He turned to face her, and even in the darkness, she could feel the intensity of his gaze. You're not meant for cages, Hillary. You were put in one, yes, but you broke out of it. You're still breaking out of it, and that means you're meant for something else entirely. Hillary felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back. What if I don't know what that is? Then you figure it out, one day at a time, one choice at a time. His voice softened. That's all any of us can do. She did not know what to say, so she did something she had never done before, something that would have been unthinkable even a few months ago. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough, calloused, the hands of a man who had done violence and might do it again, but they were gentle as they curled around hers, holding without gripping, present without possessing. They sat that way for a long time, hands intertwined, watching the darkness slowly lighten into dawn. Victor Aldridge came for his daughter on a cool autumn evening, 1 year after she had walked out of his house. Hillary was in the kitchen, cooking dinner, something she had learned to enjoy, choosing her own ingredients, preparing her own meals. The radio was playing softly, some song she half recognized, and she was humming along without realizing it. She did not hear the car pull up. She did not hear the footsteps on the front walk, but she heard the knock. Something about it made her freeze. The sound was too sharp, too insistent. Not the polite tap of a neighbor or the businesslike rap of a delivery driver. This was the knock of someone who believed he had a right to be there. Hillary set down the knife she had been using and moved toward the front of the house. Through the window beside the door, she could see a figure standing on the porch. Her father. Every muscle in her body went rigid. For a long, terrible moment, she was 16 again, trapped and helpless and alone. The fear was overwhelming, a tidal wave that threatened to drag her under. Then she remembered. She was not 16 anymore. She was not trapped, and she was not alone. She pulled out her phone and texted Roa. He's here. Then she stood by the window and waited. Victor knocked again. Hillary, I know you're in there. Open the door. She did not respond. This is ridiculous. We need to talk. I'm your father, for God's sake. Still nothing. I'm not leaving until you open this door. Hillary watched him through the glass. He looked older than she remembered, grayer, thinner, the year having taken its toll. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, hungry. A car pulled into the driveway. Roa. He got out and walked toward the house with the unhurried stride of a man who knew exactly how dangerous he was. Victor turned at the sound of his approach, and Hillary saw fear flash across her father's face. Good. Mr. Aldridge, Roa said. His voice was pleasant, conversational. I don't recall inviting you. This is between me and my daughter. Victor's voice was trying for firm, but landing closer to desperate. You have no right to interfere. I have every right. This is my property, and you're trespassing. She's my child. She's a grown woman who doesn't want to see you. Roa stepped closer. I believe I warned you a year ago what would happen if you came near her again. Victor's face paled, but he held his ground. You can't keep her from me forever. She belongs with her family. She belongs wherever she chooses to be, and she's chosen not to be with you. Hillary watched the two men face off on the porch. Part of her wanted to stay hidden, to let Roa handle this, to avoid the confrontation entirely. But another part, a stronger part, knew that would be the wrong choice. This was her battle, her father, her past, and she needed to face it herself. She opened the door. Both men turned. Victor's face lit up with triumph. Roa's went carefully blank. Hillary, Victor said, reaching toward her. Thank God. I've been so worried. Don't touch me. Her voice was calm, steady, the voice of a woman who had spent a year learning that she had the right to speak. Victor's hand dropped. His expression shifted, the mask slipping to reveal something uglier beneath. You've changed, he said. Yes. He's done something to you, brainwashed you. You were never like this before. Before I was too afraid to speak. Before I thought you might actually kill me if I stood up to you. Before I believed I deserved what you did. She stepped onto the porch. Victor stepped back. But I don't believe that anymore. I know what you are. I know what you did. And I know that you have no power over me. Not anymore. Victor's face was reddening, anger overtaking fear. You ungrateful little. After everything I sacrificed, you sacrificed nothing. You took everything. Hillary felt tears prick at her eyes, but refused to let them fall. You took my childhood, my education, my friends, my freedom. You took every part of me that might have become something good, and you locked it away in the dark. I protected you. You imprisoned me. Her voice cracked, but she did not stop. You beat me when I questioned you. You isolated me from everyone who might have helped. You spent 7 years convincing me that I was crazy, that no one would believe me, that you were the only person in the world who could love something as broken as me. That's not, but you were wrong. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but her voice was stronger than ever. I'm not broken. I never was. You're the one who's broken, Father. You're the one who couldn't stand to let someone else have a life of their own. Victor stared at her. His face was a mask of rage, but beneath it Hillary could see something else, something she had never seen before. Fear, not of Roa, not of exposure or consequence. Fear of her. You think this changes anything? His voice was vicious now, all pretense of concerned father abandoned. You think you can just walk away and start over? You're nothing without me, nothing. You'll fall apart. You'll come crawling back. No. Hillary's voice was quiet but final. I won't. She turned to Roa, who had been watching the entire exchange in silence. I want him gone. Roa nodded. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Hillary and her father. His voice was soft, almost gentle, and that made it all the more terrifying. You heard her. Leave. You can't make me. I can, and I will. Roa tilted his head slightly. Would you like me to demonstrate? Victor opened his mouth to respond. Then he looked at Roa's face, really looked for the first time, and saw something there that made the blood drain from his cheeks. Without another word, he turned and walked to his car. The engine started. The headlights came on, and Victor Aldridge drove away, disappearing into the darkness from which he had come. Hillary stood on the porch and watched him go. She waited until the taillights had vanished completely, until the sound of the engine had faded to nothing, until there was only silence and the cold night air and the man standing beside her. Then she took a breath, the deepest breath of her life, and she let it go. A year later, Hillary woke to sunlight streaming through her window, not the barred window of her childhood prison, but the open window of her own apartment, 3 blocks from the library where she now worked full-time. The room was small but neat, decorated with things she had chosen herself. Photographs on the walls, plants on the windowsill, a quilt her grandmother had made before she was born. It was not much, but it was hers. She lay in bed for a moment, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, listening to the sounds of the city waking up around her, cars on the street, birds in the trees, someone laughing somewhere, a bright, joyful sound that made her smile. Then she got up. Her morning routine was simple: shower, coffee, toast with jam. She ate at her small kitchen table, scrolling through the news on her phone, planning her day. Tonight, she had a dinner meeting with a support group she had helped organize. Other survivors of coercive control, finding their way back to themselves one step at a time. At 10 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Roa standing in the hallway, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. I thought you might want company, he said. She smiled. I always want your company. They walked to the park near her apartment and sat on a bench beneath an old oak tree. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves a riot of red and gold. Children played on the nearby playground, their laughter echoing across the grass. Hillary took a sip of her coffee and watched them run. I went to see my mother's grave yesterday, she said. Roa glanced at her. How was that? Hard. Good. She paused, searching for the right words. I told her about everything. What happened after she died. What Father did. How I got out. What else? I told her I forgave her. Hillary felt tears prick at her eyes, but did not try to stop them. For not seeing, for not protecting me, for leaving me alone with him. Did you mean it? I think so. I think she did the best she could. She was trapped too, in her own way, and holding on to anger. She shook her head. It doesn't help. It just keeps you in the cage. They sat in silence for a while, watching the children play. "I have something for you," Roa finally said. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to her. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter, typed and official-looking. "What is this?" "Your father's confession. He signed it last week." Hillary stared at the paper. Her father's signature, small and cramped, at the bottom of a document that detailed every crime he had committed against her. "How did you—" "He made some bad investments, got into debt with the wrong people, the kind of people who owe me favors." Roa's voice was matter-of-fact. "I offered him a choice: sign the confession and leave the state permanently, or deal with the consequences of those debts on his own. And he chose to sign? Self-preservation, his strongest instinct." Roa looked at her. "The confession is legally binding. If he ever comes back, if he ever tries to contact you, if he so much as speaks your name, you can take this to the police. You'll have everything you need." Hillary looked at the paper in her hands. A year ago, she had been a prisoner, a ghost, a girl who had forgotten what it felt like to hope. Now she was holding proof of her own reality, evidence that she had not imagined it, validation that she had survived something real, something terrible, something that was not her fault. She folded the paper carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. "Thank you," she said. It was not enough. The words were not big enough to contain everything she felt. The gratitude, the relief, the overwhelming sensation of finally being free. But Roa understood. He always did. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "You did this yourself. All I did was open a door." "No." She turned to face him, taking his hand into hers. "You did more than that. You saw me. When everyone else looked the other way, you saw me, and you believed that I was worth saving. You were always worth saving. You just needed someone to remind you." She leaned forward and kissed him, gently, carefully, the way you touch something precious. When she pulled back, his eyes were soft, surprised, full of something that looked almost like hope. "I love you," she said. "I don't know if I'm ready for everything that means. I don't know if I'll ever be the kind of person who can give you what you deserve. But I love you, and I wanted you to know." Roa looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, the first she had ever seen from him. "I love you too," he said. "And for the record, you're already more than I deserve." They sat on the bench as the morning light grew stronger around them, hands intertwined, watching the world wake up. There would be challenges ahead. There always were. Old wounds that still needed healing, new fears that would need to be faced, the slow, painful work of building a life from the ashes of destruction. But for now, in this moment, there was only the warmth of the sun and the touch of another hand and the simple, extraordinary miracle of being alive. The most dangerous thing is not violence, it's hope, and Hillary had finally found it.